Thank you for joining. My name is Sophia and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. We're joined here today by Andrew. I'm going to let you introduce in a minute. The purpose of the event, this is a retrofit information support and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero, and then it's delivered by Turner & Townsend. And thank you very much, everyone. And Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Sophia. Hello, everybody. I'm Andy Pinches. I'm the Operations Director at Rossendale Valley Energy, and we're working through, as you may have guessed, as you are here with us today, the Net Zero Terrace Streets project. And I'm joined by Phoebe Andrew, who is the Energy Systems Specialist at the Centre for Energy Equality, and they're working on the project with us through their Fairer Warmth platform, and she will be giving you a quick update on that as part of this as we go. So, bear with me. Okay. So today we're going to be essentially talking you through who we are, what we're doing, where it all started, what our proposed solution is to getting terraces towards net zero, how we're progressing, and where we've got to so far. Phoebe will run through the Fairer Warmth, where we are with our demonstrator properties, and the financial modelling, then a quick summary at the end, and then, as Sophia said, a few questions. So, about us. We are essentially a coalition of the willing, I suppose, kind of got this going. There's a big group of us working on this project, essentially to push towards a viable solution to bringing terraces to net zero and bringing it so that people can have low carbon heat and access to solar panels and flexibility, etc., etc. So we've got this huge group of people, like I said, CEE, Centre for Energy Equality, working on the Fairer Warmth side. We've got Rahappold, who are working on the kind of technical side and working through economic modelling. We've got Abundance, who are looking through kind of the financials for us and how it works. We've got Womble Dickinson and Spencer West from a lawyer perspective, who are looking at how we unpick liabilities and risk. And then we've got a satellite project down in Bridgend, South Wales, where Chalik and New Vision are working to see how we take the learnings that we have in Rossendale and move them to another area. So I suppose I always like to start these off by explaining where Rossendale is. A lot of people are unsure as to where Rossendale is, but it's a small local authority in East Lancashire, which is just north of Greater Manchester, borders with Rochdale at the top there. And it is the 15th smallest local authority in the UK. So one of the things that we thought about trialling this in Rossendale was, if we can do it here, we can pretty much do it anywhere. So Rossendale's got a lot of terraces, like quite a lot of the northwest and the north, and pretty much in any industrial town or city across the country. And what do you do with that? So where did we start? So Rossendale Valley Energy essentially was born out of another organisation called Valley Heritage, who were looking essentially to decarbonise an old bank. And it took a long time. We got heritage funding to do that, and we looked across the way, and it was a real nightmare trying to get air source heat pumps onto this listed building. And we turned around, essentially on the other side of the street was a whole bunch of terraces, and that kind of twigged in our minds, thinking, if it's this difficult to decarbonise this building, what about all these over here that it's got people in that can't afford to do it themselves? The routes to grants are convoluted and difficult for people to navigate, and people have other priorities, and they've got lots of other things going on before they kind of start thinking about low carbon heats and solar panels, etc. So we kind of started at that point, and we're like, so how do we do this? And we kind of have some core fundamentals that we came out, and one of them was no upfront cost, because we need this to be accessible to people at all levels, that we can kind of make it so that people can access it and be comfortable with it and work through it and benefit just as you would if you were paying for this yourself. So why, I said we looked over and looked at the terraces, and these are the kind of terraces that we were looking at, essentially. It's these stone-built, pre-1919, single skin kind of back-to-back terraces. There's no space on here for air source heat pumps, and these are in, as you'll be aware, in rows and rows and rows. There's no kind of green space or open space that you can put a large air source heat pump. Especially in places like Rossendale, there are no kind of anchor loads for any sort of centralized heat networks or anything like that are going to be, in any time soon. So we looked at them and thought, what do we do? They've got no route apart from essentially expensive electric boilers. They don't necessarily require any sort of fabric retrofit at all. They're essentially off the wall, on the wall, and it's going to be, the top pick for a lot of landlords that own properties like this because it's nice and cheap, and it'll be the tenant that will be suffering the increased costs. So that's kind of where we are, and this is what I was saying: the no upfront cost, the fabric retrofit, the kind of heat solution, low carbon heat solution, and then the power that sits behind that. That how do we get the electrons moving into these properties in a sustainable and in a fair way? So we kind of built this diagram out of those four principles, and when we came across something that didn't quite work or shifted it so something didn't quite align, we went back to that black box and started again and kind of kept working out kind of how this system would work in a way that keeps to those principles. And we're well on the way with that at the moment. So where did we get to? So we've identified kind of the issue that we've got with a lot of these properties across the country. We did a big feasibility study with Borough Hopwood through Strategic Innovation Fund's Discovery and Alpha in partnership with Electricity Northwest, our local DNO, to essentially work out what is feasible and what's not, essentially, for kind of this area within Rottendale, with the idea that it could be applicable to every terrace property in the UK. So in a nutshell, we came up with a system of ambient ground source heat pumps that would sit underneath the terraces, taking inspiration from social housing. And one partner I neglected to mention at the beginning is Kensa, who are sitting on this, who do a lot of social housing work with ground source around tower blocks. And our director likes to say terraces are essentially tower blocks on their side, which made sense to me, that there are lots of properties in a row, and why not translate that across to them? So we would fit every property with a ground source heat pump, hot water cylinder that will sit in there with them, ideally in the place where the boiler is. But as you know, that's not always going to be the case. But ideally, that's where we would like to go. So that heat pump that we're putting in, we're kind of going backwards, or working somewhat backwards. So we're pre-sizing that heat pump, the 5.8 kilowatt Hansa Shoebox NX, and then we are designing the fabric retrofit to sit around that, so that we're not going super deep with retrofit. We're doing enough retrofit so that we're bringing the heat load of the property down in line with that heat pump, so that we're not being overly disruptive. We're not having to kind of push the costs to a point where people, would look at it, even with kind of a no upfront cost and it's spread out, and look at it and it'd be totally unviable for people to even think of that. So we'd look at that package of retrofit in a way that brings it in line with that heat pump, which means that each property will have very slight difference, essentially, in what's going on to that property, depending on what's been already done to it and where it's sitting in terms of air tightness, etc. On top of that, we're looking at solar panels that will sit alongside any terraces that can house them, any south-facing, east-west-facing roofs where it's viable to put them. But we're working on a model that essentially means that the homeowners would own the panels, but we as an entity would own the generation, so that we can essentially balance and aggregate that across terraces, so that if people are sat with north-facing roofs, especially on those back-to-back, if they sit kind of that way along, the people that are on the other side, that the north-facing roof, aren't missing out on that solar, and it's aggregated across those terraces. And as clusters that we do this to start to build up, that benefit will be bigger and shared more widely amongst people that sign up to this. So essentially, that's a picture of the shoebox, and it is a misnomer. It's not actually the size of a shoebox. It is still quite large, but it's not as big as most ground source heat pumps or internal heat pumps, water to water ones. And essentially, that's a little diagram of how it essentially works. We'd be looking down the street, and then we'd stick boreholes to, where we can get them in amongst existing utilities and infrastructure, and connect houses up as and when. Fabric upgrades, as I've said, this list isn't necessarily exhaustive, and it's not necessarily going to be applicable to every property. So ideally, we wouldn't necessarily want to be putting internal wall insulation in these properties because there's not a lot of room in there anyway. But even the notion of upgrading the radiators to being slightly bigger is one that might push rooms to just be a little bit feeling on the small side. So if we can get away without it, and again, external wall insulation from the properties that we're doing at the moment, those back-to-backs that we saw just a few slides ago, the red border is essentially on their front doorstep. So if you put anything externally on that property, you'll have to go to planning and see whether we can do that. And we did have a look as part of the work we were doing on this project, and it was a nightmare to try and figure out. So, and again, as you saw, those properties, they're very nice looking properties. They're in keeping with the local aesthetic, and again, from a heritage point of view, it more than likely will be hit with some backlash. And there are systems that you can get operate and things that essentially are really nice. They've done them in places like Durham and I can't remember where else, but they're really pretty and really nice. But they also come with a pretty hefty price tag to get them looking like that. So all of these things are kind of balanced out, and it's all in that notion of getting the heat load to where it needs to be within the property. So it'll be a mixture of these measures that will go in. And as I mentioned, the solar panels and where we can get them, batteries. Again, these properties don't always have a lot of space within them, so batteries potentially may not be an option, but where they are, we could stick them on. Again, we come up with a planning problem, but on the ends of terraces where we can have community batteries that will power again and distribute through the system. But essentially, we're working on a network innovation allowance project now with Electricity Northwest to look at a smart local energy system and what that looks like on that local level, and it will sit between the home energy management system within the properties and the grid, so that we can balance and aggregate really at that local level. So essentially, that is the project as kind of where what it is, the bones of it essentially. And I will pass over to Phoebe now, who will bring you through Fair Warmth and essentially the customer journey and that part of it. Phoebe.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. So I'm Phoebe from the Centre for Energy Equality. So Andy's been talking through what Net Zero Terrace Street is and the technical concept. And we at CEE have been developing our Fairer Warmth system to be the digital spine and actually enable this process, because as we know, retrofit is very complicated and we need to try and make this as efficient and joined up as possible. So part of this is developing our Fairer Warmth system. And if anyone hasn't come across it, this is a platform that connects households with local organisations to provide energy advice. And it's essentially helping the community support everyone within their community to achieve warm, healthy homes. And the team at RVE, pictured on the very left, have been fundamental throughout developing of this core system and have been helping us develop the CRMs and the content as part of the local energy advice demonstrator. And so we're now actually with over 20 communities across the UK. The app is in Welsh, and all of these communities are using it in different ways, but all to meet their community needs, but are making a difference. And as part of this project, we've been developing a more bespoke section of the app to actually enable Net Zero Terrace Street. And that means an expansion to what the householders see, what the energy champions see, the system there, and then what the admins see, as well as a whole new supplier portal. I'll just be giving a very brief run through. So just skipping over what we've been doing. So this is an example of the householder side of the app. So this is basically if there is a Net Zero Terrace Street scheme going on in the area, the householders will be walked through the process. And we all know that retrofit is very complicated. So we've been working quite hard to try and design something that is easy as possible so that people are informed without being overwhelmed. And there's also flexibility because things change. And as this concept is moving from community to community, different barriers will come up. So it has to be able to adapt with this. So for the householders, they need to have trust and they need to understand what's going on, what is going to happen to their house. And also it will be the digital support that comes along with the in-person support. And that's fundamental to Fairer Warmth, but also schemes like Net Zero Terrace Street, so that this works on a place by place and community level. So kind of leading on from that, the energy champions are the people on the ground, and there's a whole CRM system and caseload management system so that each champion is assigned to a household. And there is also going to, as part of Net Zero Terrace Street, there will be additional champions that will be supporting them through this journey, and especially juggling the fact that different households will be coming on board at various times. And there's a saying actually within our project group of Net Zero Terrace Street of folding in the edge cases. So that means that we've been trying really hard to design this system so that it works for everyone and that actually there aren't any edge cases. Obviously, that's not always possible, but that's the intent that we have. So whilst this is an app, we know that a lot of the vulnerable people that we're working with, but also just across the board, not everyone is digitally connected. So the energy champions are actually able to onboard householders or people who are not online and actually take them through that process and have the app and gather all of the data that is needed for the techno-economic models and for all of the systems to work. And they can do that on behalf with all of the necessary permissions with that householder. And that can happen in person. And it doesn't mean that people can't be involved in this scheme and they don't get a lesser service. So that, yeah, this is kind of showing the basic overview of the energy champion system. And moving on to the suppliers. So this is actually new because we haven't previously had a supplier section of Fairer Warmth, but they are very necessary to actually deliver this scheme. So yeah, they're important from the initial assessment so that we can actually build the techno-economic model, but then all the way through for the installation and the commissioning. And similar to the householders, this needs to be as simple as possible. We need to not annoy people and want people to be on this journey with us. So trying to keep it simple, not be just another unnecessary bit of admin that is kind of pulling your hair out. So, but we obviously need QAs, we need checks. And so the supplier portal is for suppliers and their organizations to actually build their profiles, understand what appointments are coming up, what data do they need to provide, a space for them to have all of the details and actually everything that they need to be able to go to the householder and complete the work that they need and know what needs to be uploaded so that we can build this whole system. So the data is flowing, it's easy, and importantly, there is trust, especially given vulnerabilities. And so we've built in, again, trying to fold in the edge cases. How do we make sure that everyone is safe? And how do we make sure that things actually flow and try and avoid as many hiccups as possible, but also build in the fact that there will be hiccups. So again, the system needs to be flexible. And then finally, we have the admin system, which sort of brings up, it's the most complicated part of all of the systems. And that's because there's training associated with it. And they are the people, they're going to be the local delivery vehicles that know what they're doing and are making this scheme happen. So they basically have the greatest amount of functionality and the ability to manage and monitor everything going on within the scheme. And so for Net Zero Terrace Street, that also includes the suppliers, and that's all of the checks and the QAs that are needed of the suppliers themselves, but also all of the information that they're providing. And they are able to actually adapt the systems that all of the households, energy champions and suppliers see so that it can meet their community and their needs of this specific Net Zero Terrace Street, obviously with scale in mind and the nth use case. So from here, they can move the householders through the stages and they can actually manage the champions that are supporting the householders on the ground. But there's also the dashboard so that they can have easy overviews. So that's what's on the screen here. Trying to, although you can really dig deep into the data, and this is all about the data flows. So, but it also has to be really easy to pull that data out and see it at a glance, know what is going on in the area, so that you can have strategic decisions or have conversations with investors as needed. So this is also where I should have mentioned, between all of the systems, there's the ability to have automated and custom notification that are in-app, by text, email, and we're currently trying to work out how we can bring post into the situation, but we know that that's something that needs to be done. So the hope is that this is the digital spine of the solution that can be adapted, and it will, of course, be changing as we learn more as a team on quite a complicated project. But the hope is that this gives us a good basis for the communities to start. And that's me, Andy.
Thanks, Phoebe. A great summary, and kind of highlights kind of with the customer facing side. And as Phoebe alluded to, they are the heart of what we're doing, and we can have the best technical solution possible in the world for anything, but if we can't get over the doorstep, then it's pointless. So that the Fair Warmth system and that customer journey have been key and pulled everything that we've been doing from a financial and technical side. We've been slotting that into the customer journey rather than slotting the customers into the technology. So that's been really refreshing coming in and kind of working it that way. That said, back to technical stuff, and we've got, as part of the project that we're working on, we've got 3 properties that we're working on and essentially testing the methodology of Zero Terrace Streets. So within Rossendale, we've got essentially 4 main archetypes, and you'll have seen one on the picture earlier. The back-to-back mid terraces, the back-to-back end terraces, and then we've got the standard mid and terraces that have small gardens and possibly kind of alleyways and ginnels behind them. The idea eventually is to have one design per archetype, so that we can essentially, that will help us when we go to new areas or new terraces to test this out, where we can essentially have an idea of what measures will be going in and what needs to be done as a minimum for typical houses of that archetype, and then we can test and assess and see where we get to and what needs to be done. So immediately when we go to a new area, we can have a kind of a baseline. This is the likely cost of what it's going to be per property. So for these properties, we were quite lucky because we had quite a lot of space behind 2 of them in a car park. We had to apply for a car park closure with the council, and I'm not sure whether you can really make it out, but the cobbled part just on the other side of that fencing there is legally a road. So we had to apply to the county council for a road closure for that road, even though the entire time we were doing this, I didn't see a single car drive down it, nor the following months that I've been here and there on site. But essentially, for the ground source array that goes underneath, there's a lot of kit that goes with that, and you can see that in the car park there. There's 2 big water drums that essentially flow and return water. They've got pumps and all sorts of kit that needs to sit by it. So while they were getting all this sorted and getting everything on, we went to the properties and had a look at the roofs, got them ready for solar. And when they were up there, they decided that the roofs did indeed need essentially completely re-roofing. So that added a little bit of time to this, but we put everything up and started on that simultaneously with the drilling. A few pictures of kind of the site and the boreholes for the ground source being drilled. I did initially have a video in here, but it was somewhat deafening with the sound on, and it was not particularly great without the sound. But essentially, it wasn't as loud as I thought it would be. The compressor and the pump that sat behind it that was constantly flowing water to it was seemingly louder than the actual drilling, and there was very little vibration that was coming off this. And for these properties, we drilled 2 holes. one to 102 meters, and the second one was to 122 meters, and they're sitting just within the area that sits behind these properties. Inside, again, while that drilling outside was being done, and when it had finished, we started on the fabric retrofit measures. A lot further on than this now, and I do need to update these, but essentially this was the process of us running through the room and roof and kind of what was spec'd. And keen-eyed among you will see that the on the left picture, you can see that the battens in the roof space had been extended, because the spec insulation that we'd actually gone for and that was mandated by the architects was bigger than the space that was available. So rather than going back to the drawing board and working out what we can do with the space available, we managed to get a local timber yard to agree to give us some battens, and we got those nailed in so that we could get the right spec in. So the wingspan went in, and then there was some insulated fiberboard that went over the top of that as well, and that's now all been lovely plastered and sealed, and the wall at the end there is a stud wall put back in, and there's a ventilation and VHR system that's going in that will sit on there as well. I suppose that then we need to put some more pictures in here, but essentially we work top down. So we've got the fabric retrofit in the room and roof. Working down, we have a lot of air tightness measures. We managed to get away with these properties of not having internal wall insulation. So there's a lot of air tightness measures. The decentralized mechanical heat recovery ventilation that went into here. New windows and doors put on with the window reveals insulated as well. And then these properties have basements. So we are testing in one of them a kind of moisture resistant membrane that sits on the floorboards, and then the second property in this terrace, we've got insulation that sits between them as well, and we're going to see what the difference is essentially as to whether it's needed or not in terms of how efficiently the heat pump's running. Throughout all of this, and throughout kind of right from the beginning of kind of selecting these properties, we've had a vast number of sensors and monitors within the property. So we're looking at kind of changes per hour. We're looking at temperature, humidity. We've got relative humidity and temperature sensors outside the property as well. So we're looking at both of that kind of at the same time. We've installed dehumidifiers that are pulling out moisture as and when in places where we've identified that it was quite damp, so that we're taking all this learning in. So then eventually when the heat pump's finally installed and it's running, and we've got some cold weather that we can turn it on and see how it's going, we can make those comparisons and see how much we're saving and how well the system's performing. And this thread will pull through the entirety of what we're doing. So for the purposes of demonstration, this is great. The monitoring we're hoping will continue throughout the project and throughout essentially further iterations of this, so that we can essentially go back, like Phoebe said, we've got energy champions that will sit alongside this and support people through the journey of getting it installed. The idea is that they will stay somewhat in perpetuity and be able to support people and see on a fair warmth dashboard that, I don't know, Mrs. Miggins at number 48, her heat pump isn't working as efficiently as it should be, or there's an electricity spike, but the temperature and hot water and everything is staying the same. So something's gone wrong somewhere, so that we can offer that support throughout the life of this, rather than it being a fit and forget. We're sitting alongside and helping people and supporting people. And the same again if people move out and new people move into properties, that customer journey will just continue with them, and we can support them on that journey of moving through what we're doing. Which brings me nicely onto kind of the financial modelling and where we're at with this. So the idea for what we're doing eventually is that we don't want to be grant dependent. In the short term, we know that that's impossible and we can't hit the ground running straight away with all of this. But essentially, where we want to get to is move away from the boom and bust of grants and kind of that government support that's being kind of offered out to individuals and as well to local authorities. We want to get it to essentially stand on its own two legs, and if that subsidy's there, great, we can grab hold of it and support people with it. but we need it to work without. So this kind of timeline shows through kind of where we want to be, and there'll be some investment in, and essentially we're looking for that to be tapered off within kind of the wider financial modelling. But like I say, it will be remiss of us not to grab hold of any sort of grants and things if they're available for people. It says like bus on there, for example. Pretty much everyone's eligible for that currently, so we can pull that in, and that's being looked at when we're doing our financial modelling and where we are, and it helps with cost. And Warm Homes Local Grant is another one that we're looking at how we can blend that in. But obviously, that's not everyone's eligible for that, so that adds another layer of kind of how we do this and how we cost this. So that's kind of where we want to be, and eventually we want to get to a point where it's looking at blended finance, and we're looking at pulling in private investment to this. To that could be anyone from kind of L&G and pension firms and that kind of patient capital, all the way, even Treasury, and asking them, do they want to invest in this kind of thing as well? The initial rate of return, the IRR and things of this, it's not necessarily going to be massive. We're designing it again to be, very community focused and designed around community benefit and local people. So we don't want big investors coming in asking for 8, 9, 10% of it and rocketing people's bills up and then scraping that off and taking it away with them. We want it to stay within the local communities, and we're looking at a model where there'd be local delivery vehicles set up with a kind of overarching organization that we're calling Loops, which will sit as kind of the owner of IP, the owner of kind of the methodology and how you do this, and essentially look to license or franchise this out to local delivery vehicles across the country. Set up special purpose vehicles and asset codes to hold on to funding and that kind of level of finance that will unlock the ability for us to do this. And that is the idea behind that is essentially that everybody that will be delivering net zero terrace streets across the country will be following the same due diligence process, the same QA process, the same underlying methodology. So when we look to mobilize, an investor will look at it and say, yes, you've got 20 properties in, I don't know, South Wales. We've got 100 properties in Greater Manchester. You've got 50 in Newcastle, some in Brighton. Because they're all following the same process, they'll be more likely to push that money together aggregated so that we can start unlocking that patient capital, because they don't get out of bed for, less than 50 million. So we need to make sure that the amount that we're asking for, essentially, the amount that we get is the same, and that we can aggregate across the country then and push through. But again, key to all of this is the affordability of the householder. And I've banged on about it, but I think the idea with this, there'll be no upfront costs to the person, and it will be essentially set up in a way, works in a similar way to a standing charge. And I'm not a big fan of the word standing charge. I know a lot of people and prospective customers will either. So we're working on a way of kind of framing it, but essentially it works in a similar way to how we pay for electricity and gas infrastructure at the moment. The boreholes will go in and act as that kind of infrastructure asset, and then everything will be bundled together. The solar, the fabric retrofit, and the debt will essentially sit on the infrastructure and be owned by the asset company or the special purpose vehicle that sets it up. So the debt won't belong to a person or property. So we get around the fact of people moving houses or people struggling with additional payments with that. But the idea would be that would be bundled together, and then there'd be various offsets as well that would sit within that. So the rooftop solar that will sit alongside, as I said, balanced and aggregated across that local cluster. Any renewables that are off-site that may be owned by the local authority or this community organisation, and then the supply generation pool as well. So that will start looking at that. And again, like we said before, baked into this is kind of that ongoing operations and maintenance that one looks after the kit that's in the property, also the energy champs will sit alongside this and support people throughout this entire process. And we're doing all of this with the idea that the energy bill won't be any greater than it was before, which is difficult. I will admit it's difficult to get there. And we're not proclaiming that we can bring down absolutely everybody's bill, because you'll know as well as I do that a lot of people, they don't use their heating system at the moment, and we can't save money on standing charges essentially. So it can't be necessarily a blanket statement that we will reduce bills with this, but with the smart system, the soul of the batteries, as well as time of use tariffs, and kind of with that flexibility baked in, with an efficiently running system, it can bring it down to a level that would be on par with gas. And when government eventually starts to look at things like the spark gap, then projects like this and systems like this will start really coming into their own and working well. But that again, the customer is at the focal point of this. And if we can't build something that's affordable, then we need to go back and find something within the project that essentially pulls that through, so that we can make it affordable to them without compromising kind of the heat load or their kind of the healthiness and warmness of their property. So we've run through quite a lot, I appreciate, but essentially what we're looking to do is create that whole systems approach for the decarbonisation of terraces. We're not necessarily saying that this is the only route that these terraces have, but a lot of the ones that we've got up north, especially in Rossendale, back to backs, there's very little out there that we can transpose on them at the moment, and new innovations are being pulled through all the time. Heat batteries and kind of thermal stores and phase change batteries and things like that are coming through and becoming more commercial. And we'll visit that at a point. Looped CIC that will sit as that kind of singular entity will continue that work and kind of continue what we're doing at the moment at Rossendale Valley Energy to keep that innovation going. And if there is something that comes through that might be like, actually, this might work, then we will test it and keep moving, because it's designed to be customer focused. And if we can save people money, and if we can save them hassle and disruption, then we're all for that. I said that we made good progress on our demonstrator properties. They're looking quite nice, and I do need to update those slides to some nice fancy shiny ones rather than just works being done. But we're pretty much done with 2 of them, and the third one is well on the way. And again, the kind of techno-economic and financial stuff is pushing along well. So we currently end this phase of funding that we've got through Innovate UK and DESNZ in November. So we'll have everything kind of hopefully tied up with a little bow on top by then. And then we'll be on to hopefully a bigger pilot scheme where we can keep testing this and keep going and have a look at how we move through the kind of latter stages of techno-economic and financials. So we've not got any more webinars lined up just yet, but if you would like to attend any or watch any of the webinars that we've done so far, I mean, it's pretty much what we've gone through now, but there's a Q&A session on there that might be worth having a look at. Please sign up to netzero or nzts.info, and there'll be updates on there, and future webinars and future information will be put through there. Thank you very much.